"You are a prostitute, get out," said the Millionaire CEO. 4 years later, he was the one begging for forgiveness. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's Stories, your own family story channel. May the Almighty pour His strongest blessings upon every woman, strength that never bends, patience that never breaks, and love that heals even the deepest wounds. May your hearts remain brave in silence, your hands remain gentle in hardship, and your spirits rise higher than every struggle. You are the unseen foundation of families, the quiet courage behind every success, the mercy this world survives on. May your health be protected, your dignity honored, and your sacrifices returned to you as peace, comfort, and joy. May every tear you have ever hidden turn into blessings you did not expect, and may your life be surrounded by respect, safety, and endless love. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Jennifer Boyd stood in the marble foyer of the Orton mansion, her hospital scrub still carrying the scent of antiseptic, while Travis Orton's mother held up a photograph like it was evidence at a trial, a picture of Jennifer at a charity gala where wealthy donors had paid for companionship packages to raise money for the children's hospital where she worked as a nurse. The dining room behind her buzzed with conversation. 20 of the city's most influential people gathered for what Travis had told her would be a casual dinner. She'd come straight from her shift at Children's Memorial Hospital, exhausted but excited because Travis had hinted at something important tonight. Instead, she'd walked into an ambush orchestrated with the precision of a military strike. "Explain this." His mother's voice carried the particular cruelty of someone who'd already decided on guilt. The photograph showed Jennifer in an evening gown at the hospital's annual fundraiser, standing beside a donor who'd purchased a dinner companion package, a legitimate charity auction where hospital staff volunteered to have dinner with donors to raise money for sick children. Jennifer's throat tightened as every eye in the room turned toward her. "That was the hospital fundraiser last spring. We raised over $200,000 for the pediatric wing renovation. The staff volunteered to accompany donors to dinner as part of the charity packages. It was completely legitimate and supervised by the Hospital Foundation Board." "Volunteered to sell yourselves." His mother's interruption sliced through Jennifer's explanation like a knife through silk. "My son is about to take his company public, and you thought you could trap him with your little schemes before he becomes too valuable to touch." Travis stood beside his mother, silent, his face unreadable in the way Jennifer had learned meant he was calculating business outcomes rather than emotional truth. Jennifer searched his eyes for the man who'd held her last night, who'd whispered that he loved her, who'd made her believe that maybe love could cross the boundaries his mother had drawn around his life. She found nothing but ice. "Travis, tell her. Tell her what this really was." Jennifer heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it, hated that she was begging him to defend her when he should have done it without being asked. He looked at her then, and something in his expression made her stomach drop. The merger he'd been negotiating for months was nearly complete. The initial public offering that would make him a billionaire was scheduled for the following quarter. His mother had chosen this moment deliberately, and Travis had a choice to make between the woman he claimed to love and the empire his family had built over generations. "How much did they pay you?" His question came out cold, corporate, the voice he used in boardrooms when discussing quarterly losses and employee terminations. Jennifer felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "For your companionship. How much did these men pay you to spend time with them?" "Travis, I'm a pediatric nurse. That event was organized by the Hospital Foundation. Everything was documented and approved by... I've seen the evidence. Multiple events, multiple men, different dates spanning several months." His voice rose with each word, performing for his audience of business partners and society matriarchs who leaned forward to catch every syllable. "You played me perfectly, didn't you? The sweet, dedicated nurse who just happened to fall for the hotel CEO. How long were you planning to wait before you claimed I got you pregnant or sued for harassment?" The words hit her like physical blows. Jennifer looked past him to the dining room where business partners and society matriarchs watched with undisguised fascination, their faces reflecting everything from shock to smug satisfaction. This wasn't just a breakup. This was character assassination performed before witnesses who would spread the story through their entire social circle before morning. You know that's not true. You know me. You know what we have together. Her voice cracked, tears threatening to spill over despite her desperate attempts to maintain dignity. Travis's mother smiled, triumphant in a way that suggested she'd been planning this victory for months. Security will escort you out. If you try to contact my son again, if you attempt to spread lies about this family or make any claims against us, we'll pursue legal action for harassment and extortion. Our lawyers are very thorough. Travis, please. I love you. You know I love you. You know everything your mother is saying is a lie. Jennifer reached for him, but he stepped back as if her touch was contaminated, as if 8 months of intimacy and promises had never existed. You're a prostitute. Get out. His final words fell into sudden silence as the dinner guests strained to hear. I don't ever want to see you again. You're not welcome in my home, in my business, or in my life. The security guards appeared as if summoned by magic, 2 men in expensive suits who took Jennifer's arms with professional gentleness that somehow made the humiliation worse. She didn't resist as they guided her toward the door, past the gawking guests who would dine on this story for weeks, past the life she'd imagined building with Travis, past the naive belief that love mattered more than money and social position. But something made her stop at the threshold. She turned back to find Travis's business partner's wife standing up, her face flushed with anger. That charity event was completely legitimate. I was there with my husband. We participated. You're making a terrible mistake, Travis. Jennifer is exactly what she appears to be, a good woman who volunteered her time to help sick children. Travis's mother cut her off with practiced cruelty. Jennifer has been very convincing to many people. That's precisely how con artists work. They're charming and believable until they get what they want. Travis said nothing. His silence was the final nail in the coffin of everything Jennifer had believed about him. She understood then that he would always choose his mother's approval over her truth, that she would always be the outsider who couldn't possibly belong in his marble world of old money and older prejudices. The security guards led her outside into the October night. The air bit through her thin scrubs with teeth of ice. She'd left her coat inside but couldn't bring herself to ask for it, couldn't bear another moment of their judgment. She walked to her aging sedan in the circular driveway, conscious of the mansion's lit windows behind her, the party resuming inside as if she'd never existed. Jennifer sat in her car, hands shaking too badly to insert the key into the ignition. She was 6 weeks pregnant. She'd taken the test that morning, stared at those 2 pink lines with a mixture of terror and joy, planned to tell Travis tonight over what she thought would be a private dinner where they'd laugh about timing and make plans for their future. The little plastic stick was still in her purse, wrapped carefully in tissue paper. She pulled it out now, staring at the 2 pink lines that represented the future she'd imagined. Travis's joy, his arms around her, discussions about nurseries and names and whether they'd get married before or after the baby came. Instead, she held evidence of the biggest mistake she'd ever made, proof that she'd trusted a man who valued his mother's poisonous opinion more than her love. The tears came then, harsh and choking sobs that tore from her chest. She cried for the man she'd loved who never really existed, for the humiliation of being called a prostitute in front of strangers, for the baby growing inside her who would never know their father. She cried until her chest ached and her eyes burned, and the mansion's lights blurred into meaningless points of brightness against the darkness. Finally, Jennifer started her car with trembling hands. She drove away from the Oughton mansion, from Travis, from the naive belief that love was enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. She drove home to her small apartment in the part of town where people like Travis never ventured, where she would figure out how to survive what was coming. As she pulled into her parking spot, Jennifer made her decision with the cold clarity that comes after devastation. Travis would never know about this baby. She would rather struggle alone than give him the satisfaction of reducing their child to an obligation. She would rather work 3 jobs and live on nothing than let him believe he'd been right about her motivations. She would rather disappear completely than give his mother the ammunition to call this baby a trap. This baby was hers, only hers, and she would burn the world down before she let Travis Orton anywhere near them. 3 months later, Jennifer sat in a free clinic bathroom staring at an ultrasound image that changed everything. Not 1 heartbeat, but 3. Chapter 2. When the world multiplies. The ultrasound technician's hands had shaken when she counted the heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, and Jennifer understood why when the doctor explained that triplet pregnancies had serious risks and would require extensive medical care she absolutely did not have. Jennifer walked out of the clinic in a daze, the grainy ultrasound images clutched in her hand like evidence of a crime she'd committed against herself. 3 babies, 3 lives depending on her, 3 times the expenses, 3 times the needs, 3 times the impossibility of what she'd already known was impossible with 1. She sat in her car in the clinic parking lot for over an hour, staring at the images until they blurred. The doctor's words echoed in her mind like a death sentence. High-risk pregnancy, probable bed rest by the 2nd trimester, specialized care from maternal-fetal medicine, potential complications ranging from premature birth to life-threatening conditions, estimated costs that made her head spin, even with insurance coverage. Jennifer had decent insurance through Children's Memorial Hospital, but she was already stretched thin on her nurse's salary. She lived paycheck to paycheck, had student loans from nursing school, drove a car that needed repairs she couldn't afford. Adding 1 baby to that equation would have been challenging. 3 babies was mathematically impossible. The next morning, Jennifer submitted her resignation letter to her supervisor with shaking hands. She couldn't risk anyone from Travis's world seeing her pregnant, couldn't face the questions or the judgment or the possibility that someone would tell him out of some misguided sense of duty. She told her supervisor it was for personal reasons, cleaned out her locker while avoiding eye contact with colleagues, and said goodbye to a job she genuinely loved. Keisha cornered her in the parking lot before she could escape. "What's really going on? You love this job. You've talked about nothing but pediatric nursing since school." Jennifer hesitated, then told her everything in a rush of words. The pregnancy, Travis's betrayal, the triplets, the plan to disappear. Keisha listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to fury to fierce protectiveness that made Jennifer want to cry all over again. "That man is a fool and a coward. What do you need?" "To disappear." Jennifer's voice was flat with exhaustion. "I can't risk him finding out. I can't risk his mother getting involved. I just need to get through this pregnancy and figure out how to survive afterwards. He has a right to know he's going to be a father. He gave up that right when he called me a prostitute in front of 20 people and had me thrown out like garbage." Jennifer's hands clenched on the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. "These babies are mine. I'll figure it out somehow." She did disappear with the thoroughness of someone who'd spent months planning escape routes in her mind. Jennifer found a studio apartment in a neighborhood 40 minutes from the hospital, where she knew no one and no one knew her. She took a remote medical coding job that paid a fraction of her nursing salary, but allowed her to work from home in pajamas when the morning sickness hit. She sold her furniture, her television, her books, everything but absolute necessities. The pregnancy was brutal from the start. Morning sickness wasn't morning. It was all day, every day, relentless nausea that made eating torture and keeping down liquids a challenge. Jennifer lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, her body consuming itself to nourish the babies growing inside her. She was hospitalized twice for dehydration, each visit adding to debt that grew faster than her belly. By her 5th month, Jennifer was on modified bed rest. Her body simply couldn't handle the strain of 3 babies and a full-time job, even a remote one. She applied for assistance programs with forms that required her to detail every aspect of her financial desperation. She swallowed her pride at food banks, where volunteers looked at her with pity that burned worse than hunger. She stretched every dollar until it screamed, learning to live on rice and beans and whatever produce was being given away because it was close to spoiling. Her studio apartment became her entire world. Laptop for work balanced on her swollen belly, mattress on the floor because she'd sold the bed frame, a growing collection of medical bills she couldn't pay stacked on the single table she'd kept. The walls closed in on her during the long days alone, but Jennifer told herself this was temporary, that she just needed to survive until the babies came and she could figure out the next impossible step. Keisha visited when she could, bringing groceries and company and reminders that Jennifer wasn't completely alone in the world. "You don't have to do this by yourself. Let me help you tell him. Let him take some responsibility." No. Jennifer's response was immediate and absolute, honed by months of defending this decision to herself in the darkness. He made his choice. He chose his mother's lies over 8 months of what I thought was love. I'm making my choice now. These babies don't need a father who calls their mother a whore. The isolation was worse than the physical suffering in ways Jennifer hadn't anticipated. She had no family. Her parents had died in a car accident during her first year of nursing school. She was an only child with no aunts or uncles or cousins who'd stayed in touch. Her friends from the hospital gradually stopped calling, unable to understand why she'd quit so suddenly, why she'd moved without leaving a forwarding address, why she wouldn't explain what had happened. Only Keisha remained, and she had her own family to care for, her own life to live. Jennifer talked to her babies in the darkness of her apartment, one hand on her belly, feeling them move and kick and fight for space. She'd named them during a particularly bad night when the loneliness threatened to swallow her whole, and she needed to make them real, to give them identities beyond the abstract concept of triplets. Lily, Rose, and Dahlia, flowers that survived in harsh conditions, that bloomed despite everything, that represented beauty born from difficulty. "I promise I'll be enough for you," she whispered to her swollen belly during the long, sleepless nights. "You won't ever feel rejected like I did. You'll never wonder if you're wanted or if you're a burden. You're mine, and I chose you, and that will be enough. It has to be enough." But doubt crept in during the appointments where her blood pressure climbed despite medication, and the doctor's face grew more concerned. During the ultrasounds where they measured growth and warned about complications. During the nights when contractions that might be false labor or might be the real thing made her lie awake wondering if she'd make it to the hospital in time or if she'd deliver alone on her bathroom floor. Jennifer started a journal for her daughters with a notebook Keisha brought her. She wrote about her pregnancy, about their father, about the decisions she was making and why. Someday, they'd ask questions about the man who'd given them half their DNA, and she wanted to give them honest answers. She wrote about the Travis she'd fallen in love with, funny and thoughtful and passionate about his work. She wrote about the night everything shattered and why she'd chosen to keep them from him. She didn't want them to think they came from hate. They came from love. Love that hadn't been strong enough to survive his mother's poison, but love nonetheless. Her 7th month brought complications that turned serious pregnancy into dangerous one. Gestational diabetes requiring insulin injections she could barely afford, even with assistance programs. Blood pressure that climbed despite medication and bed rest, and eliminating salt from her already limited diet. Swelling so severe she couldn't wear shoes and her hands wouldn't close into fists. The doctor urged hospitalization for monitoring, but Jennifer couldn't miss work, couldn't lose the income that was all that stood between her and homelessness. She made it through her 8th month on determination and prayer and Keisha's help. Every day she didn't go into labor felt like a small victory snatched from the jaws of disaster. Every week, the babies stayed inside meant better odds for their survival, stronger lungs, higher birth weights, fewer complications. Jennifer counted down to week 34, then 35, knowing each day mattered more than she could calculate. But bodies have limits that determination can't overcome. At 32 weeks, Jennifer was working on her laptop when the first contraction hit like a fist to her spine. She thought it was false labor, another Braxton Hicks contraction, like the dozens she'd had before, until the second one came. And the third, unmistakable and terrifying in their regularity. She called 911 with shaking hands, then Keisha, then focused on breathing through contractions that were coming too fast, too hard, too early. The paramedics arrived and asked questions Jennifer answered through gritted teeth while trying not to scream. They loaded her into the ambulance with professional efficiency, and she watched her apartment building disappear through the rear windows, wondering if she'd ever see it again or if this was where her story ended. "Hang on," the paramedic said, checking monitors and adjusting IV lines. "We're almost there. Just keep breathing." But something was wrong beyond the obvious emergency. The paramedic kept glancing at her clipboard, at Jennifer's face, and Jennifer saw recognition dawn in her expression, like sunrise revealing something ugly. This woman knew her name. This woman had heard the stories that circulated after that night at the Autin mansion, stories that had apparently spread farther than Jennifer realized. "You're that nurse," the paramedic said, her voice cooling several degrees from professional warmth to professional distance. "The one who tried to trap Travis Autin with a pregnancy claim." Jennifer closed her eyes against both a contraction and the cruelty of being judged while fighting for her babies' lives. "Please, just help them. Whatever you think of me, they're innocent." The paramedics' coldness cost them precious seconds. Hesitation before starting the second IV line, delay in calling ahead to the hospital with complete information, doubt that maybe Jennifer was exaggerating her symptoms for attention the way gold diggers apparently did. By the time they reached Children's Memorial Hospital, Jennifer was hemorrhaging badly enough to soak through the sheets. "Emergency cesarean," the doctor barked as they rushed her through the doors into controlled chaos. "Get the NICU team ready. Triplets at 32 weeks. She's losing too much blood for vaginal delivery." Jennifer surrendered to the chaos of hands and voices and urgent instructions she couldn't follow. The last thing she heard before anesthesia pulled her under was the sound of 3 different alarms going off as her daughters entered the world too early and fighting for their first breaths. Chapter 3. 3 fighters, 1 warrior. The NICU had a rhythm Jennifer learned to survive by. Monitor beeps that meant life, ventilator hisses that meant breathing, the shuffle of nurses' shoes that meant care, and the sound of her own voice reading story after story to 3 tiny fighters who couldn't hear her yet, but would someday know their mother's voice meant safety. Jennifer woke after the emergency delivery to a quiet room that terrified her more than any sound could have. The last thing she remembered was unbearable pain and a doctor's urgent voice calling for the neonatal team. Now she lay in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm, a catheter she could feel, and silence where her babies should be crying. A nurse entered, her expression carefully professional in the way medical staff had when delivering difficult news. "Your daughters are in the NICU. They're stable but very premature. The doctor will be in shortly to explain everything." Daughters. 3 daughters. The words made it real in a way the pregnancy never quite had. Jennifer tried to sit up and gasped at the pain radiating from her abdomen. The nurse helped her, adjusting pillows and explaining that she'd delivered via emergency cesarean, that she'd lost a significant amount of blood, but would recover with rest and time. Jennifer barely heard the reassurances about her own health. She needed to see them, needed to confirm they were real and alive and fighting. The hours before they'd let her go to the NICU were the longest of her life, filled with doctors explaining complications and risks and percentages that made Jennifer's head spin. Finally, they wheeled her down in a wheelchair because she wasn't steady enough to walk. The NICU assaulted her senses. The constant beeping of monitors, the harsh fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, the organized chaos of nurses and doctors moving between isolates. And there they were, 3 isolates in a row, 3 tiny babies who looked more like fragile birds than humans. They were covered in wires and tubes, their skin translucent enough to see veins, their chests rising and falling with mechanical assistance. "This is Lily," the NICU nurse said gently, gesturing to the first isolette. "She's 3 pounds 2 ounces. Rose is 3 pounds even. Dahlia is the smallest at 2 pounds, 14 ounces. They're fighters, all 3 of them." Jennifer reached through the isolette opening with a shaking hand to touch Lily's impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around Jennifer's pinky with surprising strength, and Jennifer started crying in a way she hadn't allowed herself to cry since that night at the mansion. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to come early. I tried to keep you safe." The NICU became Jennifer's entire world, in a way that transcended her apartment's 4 walls. She was there every moment, visiting hours aloud, learning the monitors and alarms, understanding what each number and sound meant. She pumped breast milk every 3 hours around the clock, determined to give them something even if she couldn't hold them yet. She did kangaroo care when the babies were stable enough, pressing their tiny bodies against her chest and feeling their heartbeats synchronize with hers. The nurses taught her how to change diapers that looked like doll clothes, how to feed through nasogastric tubes when the babies weren't strong enough to suck, how to read the vital sign displays and understand when numbers were good and when they signaled problems. Jennifer absorbed everything like a student preparing for the most important exam of her life. The bills were catastrophic in a way that made her previous financial struggles look manageable. Jennifer's insurance covered much of the NICU stay, but her copays and deductibles alone were crushing. The hospital financial counselor tried to help, sitting with Jennifer in the family room and explaining payment plans and assistance programs. But even with every resource available, Jennifer was staring at debt that would follow her for the rest of her life. She didn't care. They could ruin her credit, garnish her wages, take every cent she'd ever make. Her daughters would live. That was all that mattered. Everything else was just numbers on paper. The weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness, punctuated by moments of terror. Lily was the first to breathe on her own, graduating from the ventilator to oxygen support. Rose followed a few days later, her lungs stronger than expected for her size. Dahlia struggled longer, her lungs stubbornly immature, but she fought with the same fierce determination Jennifer recognized in herself. Jennifer watched them fight and learned what real strength looked like. It wasn't the ability to endure anything, it was the ability to keep going when endurance felt impossible. It was Dahlia's tiny lungs working overtime to process oxygen. It was Rose's stubborn grip on life when monitors alarmed and nurses rushed over. It was Lily's quiet determination to gain weight gram by precious gram. A social worker visited during the 3rd week with concerned eyes and careful questions. She sat beside Jennifer in the NICU family room, her voice gentle but firm in a way that suggested this wasn't a casual conversation. 3 premature infants is overwhelming even with strong support systems. You're doing this completely alone. Have you considered all your options? There are families who desperately want children, who have resources to provide everything these babies will need. No. Jennifer's response was immediate and absolute, delivered with a force that surprised them both. They're mine. I don't care what I have to do or how hard it gets. They're mine. The social worker nodded slowly, making notes on her clipboard. I had to ask. It's part of my job, but I can see you're committed to this. We'll make sure you have access to every resource available. Resources helped, but they didn't change the fundamental reality that Jennifer was facing an impossible situation. When the babies were finally cleared to go home after 8 weeks in the NICU, Jennifer carried them out one at a time in car seats that Keisha had helped her buy second-hand. 3 tiny babies, each barely 5 pounds, all her responsibility. Her apartment had never looked smaller or more inadequate. 3 bassinets took up most of the floor space. Supplies covered every surface, bottles and formula because Jennifer's milk had dried up from stress, diapers in the smallest size available, medicines and monitors and instructions that covered pages. Jennifer stood in the middle of her studio apartment holding Rose while Lily and Dahlia slept and understood that the real battle was just beginning. The first night home, Jennifer didn't sleep at all. She fed them every 3 hours on a rotating schedule. Lily at midnight, Rose at 1, Dahlia at 2, then start over at 3. She changed diapers, checked temperatures, administered medications, and prayed through every moment that she wasn't missing something critical. By dawn, she was exhausted in ways she hadn't known existed. But there were moments of perfect joy that made the exhaustion bearable. Lily's first real smile that wasn't just gas. Rose's determined grip when Jennifer changed her diaper, Dahlia's curious eyes tracking movement across the room. Jennifer fell in love with them over and over again, these 3 tiny miracles she'd created from devastation. She worked her medical coding job during their naps, typing with one hand while holding a baby with the other. She learned to function on minimal sleep, to eat one-handed, to shower in 5-minute bursts when all 3 were temporarily settled. She joined a mother's co-op for childcare sharing, trading hours of watching other people's children for hours of help with her own. The journal she'd started during pregnancy became a lifeline. Jennifer wrote about the girls' development, their personalities emerging distinct and clear. Lily was gentle and observant, watching everything with thoughtful eyes. Rose was fierce and determined, crying loudly when she wanted something. Dahlia was curious and adventurous, the first to roll over, the first to laugh at silly faces. Jennifer also wrote about their father, preparing for the inevitable questions. She wrote honestly about falling in love with Travis, about the good parts before everything shattered. She wrote about his mother's manipulation and his weakness in choosing family approval over love. She wrote about her decision to keep them from him, not out of revenge, but out of protection. Someday, they'd read these words and understand. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, Travis Orton's carefully constructed life was beginning to crumble in ways he didn't yet recognize. The IPO that had seemed so important proceeded successfully, making him wealthy beyond measure. But his mother's manipulation of financial reports to hide company debt was discovered during the post-IPO audit. The scandal that followed destroyed everything Travis had sacrificed Jennifer to protect. But Jennifer knew nothing of Travis's problems. She was too busy surviving each day, loving her daughters, and building something from the ruins he'd left her in. On their first birthday, Jennifer made cupcakes she couldn't afford and took pictures of 3 little girls covered in frosting. She looked at their smiling faces and realized she'd done it. She'd survived the impossible year, and she'd never needed Travis Orton to do it. Chapter 4. The Architecture of Resilience. Jennifer learned that revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about construction, about building something so undeniable that the people who threw you away would one day realize what they lost, and by then you'd be too far ahead to even notice them in your rearview mirror. The triplets' second year brought new challenges that made the first year look easy by comparison. 3 mobile toddlers required constant vigilance in ways 3 infants hadn't. Jennifer baby-proofed her apartment until it resembled a padded cell, but the girls still found creative ways to get into trouble. Rose climbed everything. Dahlia opened every cabinet despite child-proof locks. Lily quietly observed and then showed her sisters how to work together to achieve goals, like reaching the cookies on top of the refrigerator. Jennifer's medical coding work became a consulting business almost by accident. A colleague asked her to help navigate an insurance denial for her mother's cancer treatment. Jennifer spent hours on the phone with insurance companies, digging through policy language, filing appeals with documentation they couldn't ignore. The claim was approved. The colleague told her friends. Those friends called Jennifer. Within 6 months, Jennifer had a side business, helping families fight insurance denials and negotiate medical debt. She charged on a sliding scale, sometimes taking payment in the form of childcare swapping or meals. Word spread through communities that couldn't afford medical billing advocates, but desperately needed them. Jennifer's phone rang constantly with people drowning in medical debt who'd heard she could help. The work was fulfilling in ways medical coding never had been. Jennifer was using her nursing knowledge and her personal experience with the healthcare system's cruelty to actually help people instead of just processing their misery into billing codes. She started winning more cases than she lost, developing a reputation among insurance companies as someone who knew the regulations better than their own employees. She enrolled in an online nurse practitioner program because the girls' futures required more than survival. They required security and opportunity. Jennifer studied during their naps and after their bedtime, falling asleep over textbooks more nights than not. She took exams while exhausted, wrote papers with one hand while rocking a crying toddler with the other, and somehow maintained grades that earned her a spot on the dean's list. The girls attended a modest daycare center where Jennifer volunteered on weekends to reduce costs. She taught the other children basic first aid, organized fundraisers, and helped the director apply for grants that brought in new equipment and supplies. Her involvement meant her daughters had care she could almost afford, and the director's flexible schedule accommodations meant Jennifer could attend classes when necessary. Lily, Rose, and Dahlia were developing distinct personalities that amazed Jennifer daily. Lily was gentle and empathetic, the first to notice when someone was sad and try to help. She loved books and would sit for hours looking at pictures, making up stories in her toddler language. Rose was protective and fierce, standing between her sisters and anything she perceived as threatening. She was physical and coordinated, climbing and running with fearless abandon. Dahlia was clever and charming, figuring out how things worked and then teaching others. She was the talker, learning words faster than her sisters and using them to negotiate for extra snacks or later bedtimes. They looked exactly alike to strangers. Same dark curls, same brown eyes, same dimpled smiles. But Jennifer saw the differences immediately. They had her features primarily, but Travis's DNA wove through them in undeniable ways. Lily had his intensity when she focused on something. Rose had his stubborn determination. Dahlia had his charisma that drew people in. The girls began asking about their father around this time, processing the reality that other children had daddies and they didn't. Jennifer had prepared for this moment, practicing answers that were honest but age-appropriate. She sat them down one evening after dinner and explained that their father didn't know about them, that he'd made choices that hurt their mother, but that he wasn't a bad person, just someone who'd made mistakes. "Where is he?" Dahlia asked with characteristic directness. "Living his life somewhere else," Jennifer said carefully. "When you're older, I'll explain everything. For now, I need you to know that you're wanted and loved. I chose you. I will always choose you." "But why doesn't he want us?" Rose's question cut straight to the fear Jennifer had dreaded. "It's not that he doesn't want you. He doesn't know you exist, and that's my choice, not his. When you're old enough to understand, I'll explain why I made that choice." Jennifer pulled all three into her lap, breathing in their little girl scent of shampoo and graham crackers. "You have me, and I'm enough. I'll always be enough." Lily, ever perceptive, asked quietly, "Are you sad he's not here?" Jennifer considered the question carefully. "I'm sad about how things ended. I'm sad that you don't have a father, but I'm not sad about having you. You three are the best thing that ever happened to me." Meanwhile, across the city in a world Jennifer had forgotten existed, Travis Orton's empire was crumbling faster than he could shore up the foundation. The IPO he'd sacrificed Jennifer to protect had initially succeeded, valuing his hotel chain at over $2 billion and making Travis wealthy beyond imagination. But the celebration lasted less than a year before investigators discovered the fraud his mother had committed to hide company debt. The scandal was massive. Travis's mother was arrested, tried and convicted of securities fraud. She served 2 years in federal prison, while Travis watched helplessly, his reputation destroyed by association, even though he was cleared of direct involvement. The investigation revealed that she'd manipulated financial statements for years, hiding debt and inflating assets to make the company appear more valuable than it was. Investors fled. The stock price collapsed. Properties were sold at losses to cover debt. Business partners who'd attended that fateful dinner party abandoned Travis, unwilling to be associated with scandal. The board forced him out of his own company, and Travis watched his mother's fraud destroy everything she'd claimed to be protecting. His mother emerged from prison with terminal cancer, the diagnosis delivered within weeks of her release. Travis cared for her because he didn't know how not to, moving her into his penthouse and hiring nurses around the clock. Their relationship was strained and bitter, filled with silences that said more than words could have. On one of her final lucid days, Travis's mother grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "I was wrong about Jennifer." Travis looked at her, this woman who'd shaped his entire life, who destroyed his happiness in the name of protecting him. "I know. Find her. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I was a horrible, prejudiced woman who destroyed something beautiful because I couldn't see past my own biases. It's too late for that. She's gone. I've tried to find her." His mother's eyes filled with tears. "I did something worse than you know. After she left, after that night, I hired someone to track her, to make sure she stayed away." She paused, struggling for breath. "He found out she was pregnant. 4 months after we threw her out, my investigator confirmed Jennifer Boyd was pregnant." The words took several seconds to penetrate Travis's grief-numbed mind. When they did, he felt like he'd been hit by a truck. "What? I knew she was carrying your child, and I paid him to keep quiet. I paid him to make sure she never told you, never came back. I justified it by telling myself she was trying to trap you, that the baby was probably not even yours." His mother was crying now, tears streaming down her gaunt face. "But I was lying to myself. I knew she loved you. I knew the baby was yours. And I took that choice away from both of you because I'm a monster." Travis couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was hearing. A child. He had a child. Somewhere out there he had a son or daughter he'd never met because his mother had known and hidden it deliberately. "Find them," his mother whispered. "Find your child. Be better than I was. Be better than I let you be." She died 2 days later, and Travis stood at her grave with almost no one in attendance, unable to cry or forgive or do anything but exist in the numb space between rage and devastation. His mother had destroyed everything, his relationship, his business, his reputation, and now he learned she'd stolen something even more precious. He had a child who was now years old, who had no idea he existed, who had been raised without him because of his mother's cruelty. Travis hired a new investigator the day after the funeral. He needed to find Jennifer, needed to know about his child, needed to make amends for sins he hadn't known he'd committed. But Jennifer Boyd had vanished thoroughly, as if she'd never existed in his world at all. The investigator searched for weeks before finding any trace. Finally, a hit: Jennifer Boyd on a professional nursing registry, listed as currently enrolled in a nurse practitioner program and working as a medical billing consultant. The address was in a part of the city Travis never visited, a working-class neighborhood 40 minutes from the mansion where he'd destroyed her. Travis sat in his car outside her building for hours, trying to work up the courage to approach. What would he say? How could he apologize for believing his mother's lies, for throwing her out, for missing years of his child's life? What right did he have to disrupt whatever life she'd built from the ruins he'd left her in? In the end, he didn't approach. He went home and hired the investigator to watch from a distance, to learn about his child without disturbing Jennifer's life. It was cowardly and wrong, and Travis knew it, but he couldn't make himself do anything else. The first photograph the investigator sent destroyed Travis. Not one child, but 3. 3 identical little girls playing in a park, laughing and chasing each other, alive and beautiful and completely unknown to him. Triplets. He had triplet daughters who were years old, who had his mother's features mixed with Jennifer's, who existed in the world without him. Travis stared at the photograph until his vision blurred, understanding finally the full magnitude of his loss. He hadn't just lost Jennifer, he'd lost everything that mattered. Chapter 5. Empire Strikes Back. Jennifer accepted the position at Riverside Family Medical with one non-negotiable condition. She would never, under any circumstances, be assigned to any patient with the last name Orton, and when the practice manager asked why, Jennifer simply said, "Personal history," in a tone that ended the conversation. The offer letter from Riverside Family Medical arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other impossible day. Jennifer was mediating a screaming match between Rose and Dahlia over a stuffed animal, while Lily quietly ate all the strawberries meant for 3 people. Her phone rang, and she answered it one-handed, while separating combatants with her free arm. "Ms. Boyd, this is Angela Ramos from Riverside Family Medical. We'd like to offer you the nurse practitioner position we discussed. The compensation package is detailed in the email I'm sending now, but I wanted to call personally because we're very excited about bringing you onto our team." Jennifer nearly dropped the phone. She'd interviewed at Riverside 3 weeks ago as a long shot, knowing their reputation as the most prestigious family practice in the city. They served everyone from working-class families to wealthy executives, had the best equipment, offered the highest salaries, and rarely hired recent nurse practitioner graduates. "I accept," Jennifer said, before Angela could continue. "When do I start?" They negotiated start date and schedule, and Jennifer made her one demand about the Orton name. Angela agreed without questioning, making a note in Jennifer's file that would stay there permanently. When Jennifer hung up, she looked at her daughters, Rose still glaring at Dahlia, Dahlia clutching the contested stuffed animal triumphantly, Lily with strawberry juice on her face, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Actual hope that life might become more than just surviving day to day. The salary Riverside offered was more than Jennifer had made as a hospital nurse, more than she'd imagined earning this soon after graduation. It meant she could afford a real apartment, could reduce her hours doing medical billing advocacy, could maybe even save money for emergencies and future expenses. She started at Riverside 6 weeks later, after arranging care for the girls at a better daycare that was still affordable with her new salary. Jennifer walked into the modern medical practice on her first day feeling like an imposter. The facility was beautiful, clean and bright with artwork on the walls and comfortable furniture in the waiting room. Her office was small but private, equipped with new computers and supplies that hadn't been used and reused until they barely functioned. Her colleagues were professional and welcoming, impressed by her patient advocacy background and her clear passion for helping people navigate the healthcare system. Within weeks, Jennifer had built a patient panel that loved her. She had a gift for listening, for making people feel heard, for remembering details that mattered. Parents requested her specifically for their children because she understood pediatric care in ways that came from experience rather than just education. The girls thrived in their new routine. The daycare was better than anywhere Jennifer had been able to afford before, with teachers who actually seemed to care about the children rather than just warehousing them. Lily loved the reading corner and would spend hours looking at books. Rose threw herself into physical activities, becoming the fastest runner in her age group. Dahlia charmed everyone, learning all the teachers' names and the names of every child in the center. Jennifer could afford dance classes for Lily, who moved with natural grace and loved the structure of ballet. She enrolled Rose in soccer, where her competitive nature and speed made her a star. She bought Dahlia an easel and endless art supplies, watching her youngest daughter create with the kind of focus that suggested real talent. For the first time since that night at the Orton mansion, Jennifer felt like she was building something instead of just surviving. She moved them to a 3-bedroom townhouse in a safe neighborhood with a small yard. She bought furniture that was new instead of second-hand. She started a college fund for each girl, contributing what she could every month. She began to believe that she'd done it. She'd survived the impossible and come out stronger. But working at Riverside meant proximity to Travis's world in ways Jennifer hadn't fully anticipated. She treated children of his former business associates, people who'd been at that dinner party, people who'd watched her humiliation. Most didn't recognize her. She looked different after years of hardship, and they'd barely looked at her face that night. But occasionally, someone would look at her twice, confusion flickering across their face as they tried to place her. Jennifer heard Travis's name mentioned occasionally. She learned through overheard conversations that his hotels had failed, that his mother had gone to prison for fraud, that his reputation was destroyed. She felt nothing, not satisfaction, not pity, just the blank indifference of someone who'd buried that part of herself years ago and moved on completely. Her supervisor noticed Jennifer's excellence quickly and wanted to promote her to a position handling high-profile clients, including house calls to executives and wealthy families who preferred private care. Jennifer declined politely but firmly, making excuses about preferring in-office practice and not wanting to rearrange her childcare schedule. The truth was, she couldn't risk encountering Travis or anyone who might connect her to him. Meanwhile, Travis was forced to confront uncomfortable truths during the long months caring for his dying mother. She confessed everything in morphine-hazy conversations that haunted Travis long after she was gone. She told him about paying the investigator to track Jennifer, about the threat she'd made to Jennifer after that dinner party, warning her to stay away or face legal consequences for harassment, about the fake photographs she'd commissioned to make the charity event look worse than it was. But the worst revelation was the pregnancy. Travis's mother admitted she'd known about Jennifer's pregnancy 4 months after throwing her out. The investigator had confirmed it, sent photos of Jennifer visibly pregnant, and Travis's mother had paid him to keep quiet. She'd justified it by telling herself the baby was probably a trap, that Jennifer would use the child to extort money, that Travis was better off not knowing. "But I was lying to myself," she whispered during one of their final conversations. "I watched those photos come in month after month. I saw her struggling, saw her growing, and I did nothing. I let my pride destroy your happiness and steal your child's first years from you. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover what I've done." Travis couldn't speak. He sat beside his mother's hospital bed, holding her frail hand, and felt rage so consuming he thought it might kill him. She'd known. She'd watched Jennifer suffer while pregnant with his child. She'd deliberately stolen years of his child's life from both of them. "Find them," his mother begged. "Find your child. Tell Jennifer I'm sorry. Be better than I was. Be better than I let you be." She died 2 days later, and Travis stood at her funeral with almost no one in attendance, unable to cry or forgive or feel anything but the weight of sins he'd committed and sins that had been committed in his name. He'd thrown Jennifer out. He'd called her a prostitute. He'd chosen his mother's lies over the woman he loved, and his mother had watched Jennifer suffer while pregnant, alone, and done nothing. The guilt was crushing. Travis began therapy because he didn't know how else to process the magnitude of what he'd lost and what had been stolen from him. His therapist helped him understand that he needed to find Jennifer, to take responsibility, to do whatever he could to make amends, even though amends were impossible for sins this deep. Travis hired a new investigator with instructions to find everything about his child. The investigator worked for weeks, following digital traces and paper trails. Finally, he called with news that made Travis's world tilt. "I found her. Jennifer Boyd is working as a nurse practitioner at Riverside Family Medical. And Mr. Orton, there's something else. The hospital records I was able to access show she didn't have one baby. She had triplets, 3 daughters, now 4 years old, Lily, Rose, and Dahlia Boyd." Travis sat down hard, his legs giving out. 3 daughters, triplets. He'd missed everything: pregnancy, birth, first words, first steps, years of life. He had 3 daughters who didn't know he existed. The investigator sent photographs taken from a distance. 3 identical little girls with dark curls and bright smiles, playing in a park near their townhouse. Travis stared at the pictures until they blurred, seeing himself in their features, seeing Jennifer in their smiles, understanding finally that he'd destroyed the only thing that had ever truly mattered. He wanted to go to her immediately, to beg forgiveness, to explain about his mother's manipulation. But his therapist urged caution. Jennifer had built a life without him, had survived impossible circumstances alone, had every right to want nothing to do with him. Approaching her recklessly could traumatize her and the children. So Travis watched from a distance, through surveillance photos he knew were wrong, but couldn't stop requesting. He learned his daughter's personalities through investigator notes. He saw Jennifer thriving at Riverside, building a career, giving their daughters opportunities. He watched her be an amazing mother and hated himself for missing it. His business continued collapsing under the weight of his mother's fraud. Properties were sold to cover debt. The flagship hotel, the Orton Grand that he'd designed and built with Jennifer's input during their time together, was seized by creditors. Travis moved out of the penthouse suite that had been his home, downsizing to a modest apartment that felt like prison. He lost everything material his mother had claimed to be protecting, and he understood that she'd cost him everything that actually mattered. On what would have been his daughter's 5th birthday, Travis made a decision. He would find a way to approach Jennifer, to take responsibility, to offer whatever he could to make amends. He didn't deserve forgiveness, he didn't deserve to know his daughters, but they deserved the truth, and Jennifer deserved the apology he should have given her years ago. Travis just had to work up the courage to face the woman he'd destroyed and the life he'd missed. Chapter 6. The haunting. Travis Orton had become intimate with ghosts. The ghost of the man he could have been, the ghost of the family he might have had, the ghosts of 3 little girls who had his smile and would never know his name, and the ghost of Jennifer Boyd, who haunted every decision he'd made since the night he destroyed her. Travis's apartment was a monument to his failures. Where he'd once lived in a penthouse suite with marble floors and panoramic city views, he now occupied a modest 2-bedroom that felt suffocating despite its reasonable size. The furniture was basic, the walls bare except for one thing he'd hung, despite knowing he shouldn't have, a photograph of his daughters. It was wrong to have it. The investigator had taken it without their knowledge or consent. Travis knew keeping it made him complicit in surveillance that violated their privacy. But he couldn't make himself take it down. 3 identical girls on swings, laughing with pure joy, frozen in a moment of happiness he'd played no part in creating. He spent hours staring at that photograph, trying to see pieces of himself in their features. Lily's serious expression reminded him of his own childhood intensity. Rose's fearless grin matched his competitive drive. Dahlia's charming smile was pure Boyd, but the mischief in her eyes felt familiar. They were strangers who carried his DNA, ghosts of a life that existed parallel to his own, but completely separate from him. The surveillance reports came weekly, and Travis read them obsessively despite his therapist's warnings that this behavior was unhealthy. He learned that Lily loved books and dance, that Rose played soccer with aggressive determination, that Dahlia drew pictures of everything and narrated elaborate stories to her sisters. He learned their favorite foods, their bedtime routines, the songs Jennifer sang to them at night when she thought no one could hear. He learned that Jennifer had become someone extraordinary. The investigators' reports detailed her work at Riverside, her growing reputation for patient advocacy, her dedication to her daughters. He read about school performances she never missed, parent-teacher conferences where she asked thoughtful questions, birthday parties she threw on a budget that wouldn't have covered appetizers at the events Travis used to attend. Jennifer had built something beautiful from the ruins he'd left her in. His daughters were loved and secure and happy. They were complete without him. And that knowledge hurt worse than anything his mother had done because it meant he wasn't needed or wanted, that his absence hadn't created the void he'd assumed it would. Travis's therapy sessions focused on processing this reality. "You're grieving a loss that happened years ago," his therapist explained, "but you're also grieving a fantasy of what could have been if different choices had been made. Neither of those griefs will resolve through surveillance and observation. You need to either approach Jennifer honestly or let them go." How do I approach her after what I did? How do I explain that I didn't know she was pregnant, that my mother hid it from me, without sounding like I'm making excuses? Travis's frustration came through in every word. "I called her a prostitute in front of 20 people. I had her thrown out like garbage. I chose my mother's lies over her truth. What apology makes that okay? No apology makes it okay. That's not the point of apologizing. The point is acknowledging harm, taking responsibility and offering amends. Whether Jennifer accepts those things isn't up to you." Travis knew his therapist was right, but knowing and doing were separated by a chasm of cowardice he couldn't seem to cross. So he continued watching from a distance, collecting details about lives he had no right to observe. He learned that Jennifer rarely dated, that her entire focus was on her daughters and her work. He learned that she'd started accepting speaking engagements about medical advocacy, sharing her expertise with community organizations. He learned that she'd paid off her medical debt through a combination of payment plans and sheer determination. Travis also learned that Dahlia had asked about her father repeatedly over the past year, that Lily had cried when she was the only child at school without a father at career day, that Rose had gotten into a fight defending her family when another child called them incomplete. Those details killed him. His daughters were suffering because of his absence, and he couldn't fix it because approaching them might make everything worse. His business continued its death spiral. The board sold the Orton Grand to a conglomerate that immediately announced plans to gut and renovate it, erasing everything Travis had built. He lost his seat on various charitable boards, his reputation too damaged for them to want his name associated with their organizations. The social circle that had seemed so important 4 years ago wanted nothing to do with him. Travis found himself in the strange position of having significant money from the IPO's early success, but no purpose, no relationships, and no future beyond the daily routine of existing. He started volunteering at a children's hospital, working in the playroom, and reading to kids who reminded him of his daughters. It was something, a way to be useful, a small redemption for sins that could never be fully atoned for. On a random Tuesday, Travis was leaving the hospital after his volunteer shift when he saw her. Jennifer, 50 feet away, walking toward the parking structure. She looked older, tired but still beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. He froze, unable to move or call out or do anything but watch as she walked past without seeing him. Then she stopped, turned, looked directly at him. For 5 seconds that felt like hours. They stared at each other across the hospital parking lot. Travis saw recognition in her eyes, followed immediately by something that looked like panic. Jennifer's face went pale, her hand moving to her chest as if she couldn't breathe. Travis raised one hand in a gesture that meant, "What? Hello? Sorry, please don't run." But Jennifer was already moving, walking quickly toward her car, not quite running, but close. Travis let her go, understanding that approaching her now in public would be ambush rather than conversation. But the damage was done. Jennifer had seen him. She knew he was in the city, knew he might appear anywhere. Travis had destroyed her sense of safety all over again through his mere presence. He went home and wrote a letter he'd probably never send, trying to put 4 years of guilt and regret into words. The letter grew to 6 pages before Travis gave up, understanding that some things couldn't be explained or apologized for, they could only be endured. A week later, Travis's investigator called with news that made his stomach drop. "Jennifer knows you're looking for her. She's been asking questions, changing her routines, implementing security measures. She's scared, Mr. Orton. Whatever you're planning to do, you should do it soon before she takes the girls and disappears completely." Travis realized he'd been selfish in his surveillance, thinking only about his own need to know his daughters, without considering how his presence might terrify Jennifer. She'd built a life based on him never finding her. Now she knew he had, and she was preparing for the confrontation she'd spent years avoiding. Travis couldn't let her disappear again. He couldn't miss another 4 years, or however long it took to find them next time. He had to act. Had to approach her, had to take responsibility regardless of the outcome. But first, he needed to work up the courage to face the woman he'd destroyed and admit that everything, every single thing about that night and the years since had been his fault. Travis sat in his apartment, staring at the photograph of his daughters, and wondered if courage was something you could develop, or if you either had it or you didn't. He'd never had it when it mattered. Maybe it was too late to start now. But his daughters deserved better than a coward for a father, even if they never knew him. So Travis made plans to approach Jennifer, to face her anger and pain, to offer apologies he knew weren't enough, and accept whatever consequences came from years of sins committed and sins inherited from his mother. He just hoped she'd listen long enough for him to explain that he hadn't known, that he'd been looking for her, that he was sorry in ways sorry could never capture. And if she didn't listen, if she told him to leave and never come back, then he'd do that too, because that was what she deserved. Her choice finally, after years of choices being stolen from her. Travis wrote down what he wanted to say, practiced it until the words felt right, and waited for the courage to actually speak them. Chapter 7. The Collision Course. Jennifer had perfected the art of hypervigilance, scanning every restaurant before entering, checking every crowd for his face, creating exit strategies for situations that might never happen. But 4 years of this exhausting performance had taught her that you can't outrun fate forever. You can only choose the ground on which you finally face it. The morning after seeing Travis at the hospital, Jennifer called in sick to work for the first time since starting at Riverside. She sat in her kitchen while the girls ate breakfast, staring at nothing, trying to process the impossible collision of past and present that had occurred in the parking lot. "Mama, you're not eating," Lily observed with the quiet concern that characterized her eldest daughter. Jennifer forced a smile. "Just not hungry, sweetie, I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Seeing Travis had triggered something she'd thought she'd buried completely. Not love, not even anger, but a primal fear that he would take her daughters from her. Legally, as their biological father, he had rights she couldn't prevent. If he decided to pursue custody, he had resources she couldn't match. One DNA test would prove paternity. One court battle could destroy the life she'd built. Jennifer spent the day researching family law, calling legal aid services, trying to understand what rights she had and what rights he could claim. The answers terrified her. Biological parents had significant rights even without prior involvement. Courts favored shared custody when possible. Fathers who could prove they'd been kept from their children could argue for make-up time. She called Keisha, explained everything in a rush of panicked words. Keisha listened, then spoke with the calm certainty of someone who'd been Jennifer's rock for years. "First, breathe. Second, he hasn't approached you. Maybe he won't. Maybe seeing you scared him as much as it scared you. Third, even if he does, you have years of being their sole parent. Courts don't just hand kids over to strangers, biological father or not. You don't understand. He has money, lawyers, resources. I have nothing. He could take them, and I couldn't stop him. Jennifer, listen to me. You are their mother. You were there for every fever, every nightmare, every scraped knee. You're the one they run to when they're scared. No court is going to erase that. Stop panicking and start planning." Keisha was right, but fear wasn't rational. Jennifer implemented new security measures, updated the emergency contacts at daycare with specific instructions that only she or Keisha could pick up the girls, added a password system, provided photos of Travis with instructions that he was not authorized. She varied her routes to work, her grocery shopping times, her routines. She bought motion sensor lights for her townhouse and actually used the alarm system she'd never bothered with before. The girls noticed her stress. "Mama, why are you scared?" Rose asked with characteristic directness. Jennifer knelt to be at eye level with her daughters. "I'm not scared, honey. I'm just being careful. There are some things from before you were born that I need to handle. Nothing for you to worry about." But they did worry. Children were perceptive in ways adults forgot. Lily became clingy, following Jennifer from room to room. Rose became aggressive at school, getting into fights with children who looked at her wrong. Dahlia asked endless questions about their father, as if she'd sensed the connection between Jennifer's fear and the man they'd never met. "When can we meet him?" Dahlia asked one night at bedtime. Jennifer's heart clenched. "Someday, maybe. When you're older and can understand everything that happened." "But why not now? Other kids have daddies now." "Because it's complicated. And I need to make sure it's safe and right for you. Trust me, okay? Everything I do is to protect you." Dahlia nodded, but her expression suggested she didn't quite understand. None of them did. How could they understand that their mother was terrified their father would appear and shatter everything they knew? 2 weeks after the hospital encounter, Jennifer was beginning to think maybe Travis had been as spooked as she was, that maybe he'd continue watching from whatever distance he'd been maintaining. Then Rose got hurt at soccer, and everything accelerated toward inevitable collision. Rose went for a ball with her usual fearless aggression, collided with another player and went down hard. The coach called Jennifer immediately. "She's okay, but there's a lot of blood. Head wounds bleed a lot even when they're minor, but you should probably get her checked out." Jennifer picked up all 3 girls and drove to the emergency room, Rose holding a towel to her head, Lily crying in sympathy, Dahlia asking medical questions with the curiosity she'd inherited from watching her mother work. They arrived at Children's Memorial Hospital during early evening hours when the ER was busy but not overwhelmed. What Jennifer didn't know was that Travis was in the building. He'd been volunteering in the pediatric playroom, something he'd started doing after his mother's death, trying to be useful in some way that didn't require him to explain who he was or why he needed to be around children who weren't his. He was leaving through the main entrance when he decided to stop by the ER waiting room, a decision that would change everything. Travis sat in the waiting room checking his phone, postponing the return to his empty apartment. He was thinking about Jennifer, about his daughters, about whether he'd ever work up the courage to approach them. Then he heard a commotion at the registration desk. A woman's urgent voice, children crying, staff responding to the word bleeding. He looked up and saw them, Jennifer carrying Rose, blood soaking through a towel, Lily and Dahlia following close behind, all of them scared and focused on the immediate crisis. They were 20 feet away, real and solid, instead of surveillance photographs, moving through the ER with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested this wasn't Jennifer's first emergency room visit with her daughters. Travis stood without thinking, instinct pulling him toward them before conscious thought could intervene. As he moved closer, Rose looked directly at him with eyes identical to his own and asked her mother in a voice loud enough to carry, "Mama, why is that man staring at us?" Jennifer turned, saw Travis, and the color drained from her face so quickly Travis thought she might faint. For 5 seconds that felt like hours. They stared at each other across a crowded ER waiting room while their daughters stood between them, and the entire foundation of Jennifer's carefully constructed world cracked. Jennifer grabbed all 3 girls with a fierceness that bordered on violence, pulling them toward her as if Travis might snatch them right there in front of witnesses. "Registration can wait," she told the nurse in a voice that shook despite her attempts to control it. "We'll be in the treatment area." She rushed them through the doors that led to the examination rooms, leaving Travis standing in the waiting room with other patients staring at him, wondering what he'd done to cause such visible terror. Travis sat back down slowly, his legs unsteady, understanding that he'd just destroyed Jennifer's sense of safety again, that his presence was a weapon even when he had no intention of causing harm. He left the hospital knowing he'd just accelerated something that couldn't be stopped now. Jennifer knew he'd seen them. She knew he'd recognized Rose, recognized all of them. She knew he was in the city and apparently frequenting the same places she did. The collision course they'd been on for months had just reached its inevitable impact point. Travis went home and did something he should have done weeks ago. He wrote Jennifer a letter, not an explanation or an excuse, just an acknowledgement that he knew, that he was sorry, that he wanted to talk if she was willing. He included his phone number and address, then mailed it to her townhouse. Then he waited to see if she'd respond or if she'd disappear again, taking his daughters to somewhere he'd never find them. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. Jennifer didn't sleep for 3 days after the hospital encounter, jumping at every sound, checking locks obsessively, researching restraining orders and custody laws, preparing for a war she prayed wouldn't come, while knowing in her bones that the fragile piece she'd built was about to shatter. Rose's head injury required 5 stitches, but was otherwise minor. The doctor cleared her for return to normal activities, handed Jennifer aftercare instructions, and sent them home. Jennifer drove on autopilot, hyper-aware of every car that might be following them, taking random turns to ensure no one tracked them to their townhouse. The girls knew something was wrong. They'd seen their mother's panic, felt her terror, and children absorbed emotional states like sponges. Lily became clingy in a way she hadn't been since infancy, following Jennifer from room to room and crying when Jennifer was out of sight. Rose grew aggressive and defiant, acting out at school and at home, fighting against rules and boundaries. Dahlia asked endless questions Jennifer couldn't answer without explaining things her daughters were too young to understand. "Who was that man?" Dahlia asked for the 5th time since the hospital. "Someone from a long time ago," Jennifer answered, sticking to the script she'd developed. "Is he our daddy?" The question stopped Jennifer cold. She looked at Dahlia, clever, observant Dahlia who noticed everything and realized lying was pointless. "Why would you think that?" "Because you got scared when you saw him. And because Rose said he has the same eyes as us. And because you keep checking the windows like he might be outside." Dahlia's logic was unassailable. Jennifer sat down heavily, pulling all 3 girls into her lap, even though they were getting too big for it. "Yes, that was your father. And no, I'm not going to explain everything right now because you're too young. But I need you to understand something. I am protecting you. I have always protected you. Everything I do is to keep you safe." "Are we safe from him?" Lily asked quietly. The question broke Jennifer's heart. "You're safe from everyone while I'm here. I promise." But she couldn't keep that promise. Couldn't control what Travis might do now that he knew where they went for medical care, what their routines looked like, what his daughters' faces looked like in person rather than surveillance photos Jennifer was certain he'd been taking. She called Keisha again, more frantic this time. "He saw them. He was at the hospital and he saw them, and now he knows for sure, and I don't know what to do." "First, you calm down because your girls can hear you and they're already scared. Second, you wait to see what he does. He hasn't approached you beyond being in the same place. Maybe he won't. Maybe he's as scared as you are. Or maybe he's gathering evidence for a custody case. Maybe he's documenting that I kept them from him so he can paint me as the villain." "Jennifer, listen to yourself. You're spiraling. He called you a prostitute and threw you out when you were pregnant. Any court would understand why you didn't tell him. Stop creating worst-case scenarios and focus on what's actually happening." What was actually happening felt like slow-motion disaster. Jennifer couldn't eat, couldn't focus at work, snapped at colleagues and patients. Her supervisor noticed and asked if everything was okay. Jennifer lied, said she was fine, just dealing with some personal stress. The supervisor didn't believe her but didn't push. Jennifer updated her will, listing Keisha as guardian if anything happened to her, including detailed instructions about keeping the girls away from Travis Orton under any circumstances. She knew it wouldn't hold up legally if he pursued custody, but it felt like doing something instead of just waiting for disaster to strike. 3 days after the hospital encounter, a letter arrived. Jennifer recognized the handwriting on the envelope immediately, even though she hadn't seen it in years. Travis's distinctive scrawl that she'd once found charming. Her hands shook as she opened it. The letter was short, no excuses or explanations, just acknowledgement. "Jennifer, I know I saw you and our daughters at the hospital. I know that my presence frightened you, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a lot of things, more things than I can list in a letter. I learned the truth after my mother died. She confessed that she knew you were pregnant, that she paid an investigator to track you and keep quiet about it. I know that doesn't excuse what I did to you at that dinner party, and I'm not trying to make excuses. I was wrong. I believed lies instead of believing you. I threw you out and called you horrible things that weren't true. I destroyed what we had because I was a coward who valued my mother's approval more than your love. I've missed 4 years of our daughters' lives because of choices I made and choices my mother made. I can't get those years back. I can't undo the harm I caused you, but I want to know them, if you'll let me. I want to be part of their lives in whatever capacity you decide is appropriate. I'm not threatening legal action or demanding my rights. I'm asking, as someone who has no right to ask, for a chance to be what they deserve. If you decide the answer is no, I'll accept that. If you want to set boundaries and conditions, I'll follow them. This is your choice, Jennifer. It always should have been. My phone number and address are below. If you want to talk, I'll be available any time. If you don't want to talk, I'll understand that too. I'm sorry will never be enough, but I'm sorry anyway, for everything. Jennifer read the letter 3 times, searching for manipulation or threats disguised as apology. She found none, just acknowledgement of sins and deference to her judgment. It should have made her feel powerful, but instead, it made her feel trapped, because now she had to make a decision she'd spent 4 years avoiding, whether their daughters should know their father. She called Keisha again. He sent a letter. He wants to meet them. He's leaving it up to me. What do you want to do? I don't know. I've spent 4 years convinced keeping them apart was right. But seeing him at the hospital, seeing how he looked at Rose, he's not the man who threw me out. Or maybe he is, and I'm just seeing what I want to see. Do the girls ask about him? Constantly, especially after the hospital. They want to know who he is and why he's not part of their lives. Then maybe it's time they got answers. Not necessarily a relationship with him, but answers. They deserve to know their story, Jennifer. The whole story, including the parts that are ugly and painful. Jennifer knew Keisha was right. She'd always known this day would come, had prepared for it in her journal and her conversations with the girls, but knowing intellectually that they deserved the truth was different from actually telling them, from opening the door to a man who'd caused her such deep pain. She spent a week thinking about it, researching how to introduce biological parents after years of absence, consulting with a family therapist who specialized in complex custody situations. The therapist's advice was clear: move slowly, prioritize the children's emotional safety, be honest about the past in age-appropriate ways, and maintain firm boundaries. Finally, Jennifer made her decision. She would meet with Travis first, alone, and set the ground rules. If he agreed and followed through, she'd consider letting him meet the girls in a controlled setting. If he didn't, she'd cut contact permanently and damn the legal consequences. She texted the number he'd provided. Tomorrow, 10 p.m., River Park South entrance. Come alone or I call my lawyer and you never see them again. His response came immediately. Thank you. I'll be there. Jennifer spent the next day preparing for a conversation she'd both dreaded and anticipated for 4 years. She wrote down everything she wanted to say, every boundary she needed to establish, every condition he'd have to meet. She practiced staying calm, staying focused, not letting old feelings interfere with what was best for her daughters. At 9:45, she drove to River Park, leaving the girls with Keisha and detailed instructions about what to do if Jennifer didn't return by midnight. She parked near the south entrance and walked to the spot where she and Travis used to meet when they were secretly dating, before his mother found out, before everything fell apart. The irony of choosing this location wasn't lost on her. She was bringing him back to the scene of a crime he didn't even know he'd committed, the murder of the naive girl who'd believed love conquered all. Jennifer waited in the darkness near the river, watching the water reflect city lights, and prepared to face the man who'd destroyed her life and given her the 3 best things in it simultaneously. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. River Park at night was where Jennifer used to run before her life exploded, where she used to meet Travis when they were sneaking around before his mother found out, and choosing it for this meeting felt like bringing him back to the scene of a crime he didn't even know he'd committed. Travis arrived at exactly 10, approaching slowly as if afraid sudden movement might make Jennifer bolt. He looked different from the man who'd thrown her out, thinner, older, wearing the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying guilt for years. He stopped 20 feet away, giving her space, waiting for permission to come closer. "Thank you for meeting me," he said quietly. Jennifer didn't respond immediately. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years, and tried to reconcile this hollow-eyed man with the one who'd called her a prostitute in front of 20 people. "I'm not here for you. I'm here because my daughters ask about their father constantly, and I'm tired of lying to them. I understand. No, you don't. You don't understand anything about what the last 4 years have been like. But you're going to listen while I tell you, and you're not going to interrupt or make excuses or try to justify what you did. Travis nodded, sitting on a nearby bench, hands folded in his lap, like a student waiting for judgment. Jennifer stayed standing, needing the physical advantage of looking down at him. I was 6 weeks pregnant when you threw me out. I'd taken the test that morning and planned to tell you that night. Instead, I sat in my car outside your mansion and cried for 2 hours because the man I loved believed his mother's lies instead of fighting for me. Jennifer's voice was steady, emotionless, reciting facts without the tears that had accompanied them originally. I quit my job because I couldn't risk anyone from your world seeing me pregnant. I moved to a neighborhood where I knew no one. I took a remote job that paid barely enough to survive because I had no other options. The pregnancy was high risk from the start. Triplets often are. I was hospitalized twice for dehydration before I was even showing. I developed gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, complications that required care I could barely afford. She watched Travis's face crumble as she spoke, but she didn't stop. He needed to hear this. He needed to understand what his choice had cost. I went into premature labor at 32 weeks. The paramedic who responded had heard the stories about me trying to trap you. She hesitated before treating me, delayed calling the hospital, and her judgment nearly cost me my daughters' lives. They were born via emergency cesarean, barely 3 pounds each, covered in tubes and wires. They spent 8 weeks in the NICU fighting to survive. Jennifer pulled out her phone, showed him photos she'd kept, tiny babies in isolettes, herself exhausted and alone, medical bills that reached numbers she'd never imagined owing. Travis looked at each photo as if they physically hurt him, tears streaming down his face. The bills were catastrophic. I maxed out credit cards, destroyed my credit, applied for every assistance program available. A social worker suggested adoption because 3 premature infants was too much for a single mother with no support system. I told her they were mine and I'd burn the world down before I let anyone take them. Jennifer, Travis started, but Jennifer cut him off sharply. I said, don't interrupt. You wanted to know. You're going to know everything. She continued, describing the impossible first year, the sleep deprivation, the poverty, the isolation. She described working remote jobs while caring for 3 infants alone. She described Rose stopping breathing and having to perform infant CPR while calling 911. She described nights when she'd cried in the shower because she didn't know how she'd make it another day. But I did make it. I went back to school, became a nurse practitioner, built a career, gave them a good life. I did it alone because you made your choice that night at your mother's mansion. You chose her lies over my truth. You chose your precious business deal over the woman you claimed to love. Travis was sobbing now, broken and devastated, but Jennifer felt no satisfaction in his pain. Just exhaustion and the weight of 4 years of anger she'd been carrying. Your mother knew, she continued. Your letter said she confessed, but I need to hear you say it. Your mother knew I was pregnant and deliberately kept it from you. Yes, Travis managed through tears. She hired an investigator. He tracked you throughout your pregnancy, sent her photos, documented everything. She knew you were having triplets. She watched you struggle and did nothing. She paid him to keep quiet because she convinced herself you were trying to trap me. And you believed her about the charity event. You believed her lies without even asking me for my side of the story. I know. I was wrong. I was a coward and a fool, and I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too weak to stand up to her. Travis's voice broke. I can't undo it. I can't get back the years I missed. I can't fix what I did to you, but I want to be what they deserve now, if you'll let me. I want to know them. Jennifer pulled out another item from her bag, a video file on her phone. Before you meet them, you need to see this. She played the video. Rose's first steps in the NICU, taken by a sympathetic nurse. The footage showed Rose, tiny and wired to monitors, taking 3 wobbly steps toward Jennifer's voice while Jennifer cried and cheered her on. The pure joy and terror in Jennifer's voice was unmistakable. This is what you missed because you believed lies instead of love. You don't get to have them because you finally feel bad. You get nothing unless I decide otherwise. She stopped the video and looked at Travis with eyes that held no forgiveness, only calculation about what was best for her daughters. I'm not promising anything, but I'll think about whether they should know you exist. If, and that's a massive if, I decide they should meet you, it will be on my terms, at my pace, with a therapist present. The first time you disappoint them, lie to them, choose anything over them, you're gone forever. Do you understand? Yes, Travis said immediately. I don't care about your guilt or your suffering or your need for redemption. This isn't about you. It's about whether knowing their biological father benefits them or harms them. That's the only calculation that matters. I understand. What do you need from me? Jennifer pulled out a document she'd prepared with her lawyer, conditions and boundaries for any potential relationship with the girls. Travis would attend family therapy. All contact would be supervised initially. He would never speak badly of Jennifer or question her decisions in front of them. He would be honest about the past in age-appropriate ways. He would prioritize their emotional safety over his own desires. He would accept that Jennifer was their mother first, last, and always, and that he was granted access to them as a privilege, not a right. Travis read through the entire document and signed it without hesitation. Whatever you need, whatever they need, I'll do it. Jennifer took the signed document and looked at him for a long moment. I spent 4 years hating you. Then I spent time being indifferent to you because hate requires energy I didn't have to spare. Now I don't know what I feel except protective of them. They're curious about you. They've asked to meet you. But curiosity isn't love, and meeting you doesn't mean forgiving you. I don't want forgiveness. I just want the chance to show them I'm not the man I was. Travis's voice was quiet, stripped of any defensiveness or pride. Jennifer stood to leave, then turned back. I'll call you next week with details about a therapist appointment. It will be supervised and short. If it goes well, we'll go from there. If it doesn't, this was your only chance. She walked away, leaving Travis sitting alone on the bench by the river. As she drove home to her daughters, Jennifer felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness, not trust, but the smallest opening of possibility. Maybe he had changed. Maybe he was genuinely willing to do the work. Or maybe he'd disappoint them the way he'd disappointed her, and she'd have to pick up the pieces again. Either way, Jennifer knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her daughters were hers first. They always would be, and anyone who wanted to be part of their lives would have to earn it every single day. Chapter 10. The Beginning of Reckoning. Jennifer spent 2 weeks staring at the files Travis had given her. His mother's surveillance reports, photos of her pregnant self she didn't know existed, evidence of a conspiracy that stole 4 years from all of them, and realized that hating Travis was easier than deciding whether their daughters deserved to know a father who was finally willing to earn them. The decision came through consultation with Dr. Okoye, a family therapist who asked the question Jennifer couldn't answer. Will hiding their father protect your daughters or create a wound that festers over time? Jennifer had spent 4 years convinced keeping Travis away was protection, but watching her daughters ask endless questions made her question whether protection and avoidance were the same thing. She told the girls on a Saturday morning, all 4 of them on the couch. Your father didn't know you existed until recently. He and I had a serious fight before you were born, and I chose not to tell him because I was hurt and angry. He's been looking for us since he found out, and he wants to meet you. Dahlia asked why they fought. Jennifer explained honestly. He believed lies, said mean things, chose his mother over her. I was so hurt that I decided to raise you alone rather than risk him rejecting you the way he rejected me. Did he reject us? Lily asked quietly. No, sweetheart. He didn't know about you to reject you. I kept you from him because I was protecting you, And maybe protecting myself too. Rose asked if Jennifer wanted them to meet him. Jennifer took a deep breath. I want you to have all the information you need. Part of that is knowing your father, who he is, what happened, why things are the way they are. Are you scared he'll take us away? Dahlia hit Jennifer's deepest fear. A little. But I'm more scared of you growing up feeling like something was missing that I could have given you. So I'm letting you meet him in a safe place with a therapist there. All three said yes. Lily tentatively, Rose challengingly, Dahlia enthusiastically. Jennifer scheduled the appointment for the following week. Dr. Okoye's office was welcoming. Soft colors, comfortable furniture, toys the girls immediately gravitated toward. Jennifer positioned herself between her daughters and the door, a physical barrier Travis would have to get through to reach them. Travis entered exactly on time. All three girls stared at him with intensity reserved for something new and threatening. He stopped just inside, holding nothing, looking terrified. Hello, he said quietly. I'm Travis. Your mom was kind enough to let me meet you. Dahlia spoke first. Why didn't you want us? Jennifer saw Travis flinch. He looked at her for permission. She nodded. This was his chance to be honest, or lose them forever. Travis sat across from the girls. I didn't know about you. If I had known, nothing would have kept me away. I know that doesn't fix the years I missed, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my life showing you that you deserved better than what I gave your mother. Mama says you were mean to her, Rose challenged. I was. I was cruel and wrong. I believed lies instead of believing her. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was a coward and you all paid the price. Lily asked the question that broke Jennifer's heart. Do you love us? Travis's voice broke. I've loved you since the moment I learned you existed. I've missed 4 years of your lives, and that's my fault. But I'm here now, and if you let me, I'll prove that love means showing up every day. Rose stood and walked over, extending her hand formally. You have to earn us. Mama says people have to earn things. Travis shook her hand. I know. I will. Dahlia followed. Will you teach us things? Anything you want to learn. Lily came last, studying his face with thoughtful intensity. You look like us. You have my eyes, but you have your mother's courage and strength, which are much better things to inherit. Lily touched his hand briefly before returning to Jennifer's side. It wasn't acceptance, but it was acknowledgement, a beginning. The session lasted an hour. The girls asked questions, Travis answered honestly. When it ended, Dahlia turned back. Will we see you again? Travis looked at Jennifer. She took a breath. If you want to, and if your father shows up when he says he will and does what he promises, then yes, once a week for now. Jennifer and Travis spoke privately while the girls waited with Dr. Okoye. This doesn't fix what you did to me. We're not friends. You'll see them once a week, supervised for 3 months. If you're consistent, we'll expand from there. But understand this, I built them from nothing. They're strong because I taught them strength. You get to be part of their lives now, but I'm the mother who stayed. Don't ever forget that. I won't. And Jennifer, I'm sorry. For everything. For not believing you, for choosing wrong, for missing 4 years I can never get back. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become better than who I was. Jennifer looked at him, searching for insincerity and finding only genuine remorse. Then start now. Show up next week. Be on time. Be present. That's how you earn them. The following weeks brought new routine. Travis came every Tuesday evening, exactly on time. He learned Lily loved to read and brought books. He learned Rose played soccer and asked about her games. He learned Dahlia drew constantly and sat beside her creating terrible artwork until she giggled. The girls were cautious, testing him with difficult questions. Travis navigated it all with patience Jennifer hadn't known he possessed, answering honestly, accepting their wariness without forcing connection. One evening, Jennifer watched through Dr. Okoye's window as Travis read to all 3 girls, Lily on his lap, Rose and Dahlia on either side. They weren't comfortable yet, but they were trying. Travis looked up and caught Jennifer's eye through the glass. She didn't smile, but she nodded once. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness. Travis nodded back, understanding. He got this chance and no more, that love was earned through consistency, that these girls were Jennifer's first and his by permission only. Jennifer walked to her car and allowed herself to consider that maybe she didn't have to do this alone anymore, that maybe letting them know their father didn't diminish what she'd built, that maybe they all deserved the chance to heal. The last line she wrote in her journal that night was, "This isn't the ending I imagined, but perhaps it's the ending we all needed. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. And we're all still standing." The end.